Right, thank you very much everyone. I have a quick swig of tea. I'm pleased to see such a good turnout tonight, so I'm very pleased to be here speaking with you. There's going to be some quite interesting information, some revelations tonight, and I think you're going to go away with quite a lot to think about. So here we go.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
So you all knew who that was from the caption, and I think those words, certainly the first section there, most people have heard, but the second section is less familiar to most people, and I think it's just as relevant, and I think you're going to see some of the results tonight of the extremes to which we are the captives of the scientific technological elite, to a far, far greater extent than most people would be willing to accept. And I'm going to show the evidence for that tonight. To acquire knowledge, one must study, but to acquire wisdom, one must observe. And I haven't encountered anybody who's better at observing things than somebody called Dr. Judy Wood. But that was written by Marilyn Voss Savant, a writer. Okay, so tonight I'm going to look at some preliminary 9/11 truth issues. How many people have sort of had some dealings with 9/11 truth? You know, how many have looked at the evidence that it was an inside job, which it was? Yeah, so over half then. Yeah, okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my initial involvement with 9/11 truth activities, and how I became involved with the 9/11 Scholars Group, which is kind of one of the centerpieces. At the back there, I've got a lot of booklets and articles. Please take them, make a donation. I've got a couple of guys there, Steve and Steve, helping out, so thanks very much for that. To back up what I'm saying, you'll also see it on the website. I've got that on. The leaflets are free. Please take the leaflets. You know, I'm giving you a lot of information tonight, and I might have to skip over some things because I've probably tried to put too much in, so I do make apologies for that already. We're going to look at evidence for media fakery on and before 9/11. Evidence which indicates there were no large bombings at the World Trade Center, which is one of the big controversial topics in 9/11. Evidence for the use of some type of directed energy weapon, that's DEW, being used to destroy most of the World Trade Center complex, if not all of it. Links between the energy cover-up and the 9/11 cover-up, and evidence that there is an active and ongoing effort to cover up and discredit research into Jew and no planes and some of those individuals undertaking this activity. And I've got all that evidence back there and some of it in here too. And additional 9/11 related evidence and issues which you'll find most surprising. Now, I'll start off by saying I used to believe the official story. up until about 2003. It was about, I think, late 2003 where I'd read a couple of articles about something called state-sponsored terrorism. And you know, when I heard these stories, I remember hearing stories on the BBC of these hijackers turning up alive, and I thought, there must be some mess up. You know, these reporters get things wrong sometimes, so it must be just that. And I didn't really think about it. Over time, however, like most of us here, I've learned about how governments lie to a far greater extent than even heavy-hitting investigative journalists such as John Pilger, Greg Palast, etc., are willing to state publicly. People like John Pilger, you know, a very, very good journalist. What's he said about 9/11? Zip, to my knowledge. And governments have a history of being involved in false flag terrorism. Up until September the 11th, my understanding is that the scale of these false flag attacks was small and was generally restricted to things like diplomatic embassies and countries where conflicts were already in progress, such as Afghanistan and places like that. September the 11th was very much different. In fact, I would challenge you by the end of this presentation to say that it was even much more different than you've thought up to now, for those who haven't already seen some of the stuff that I'm presenting tonight. We know 9/11 was a big illusion. Well, most of us here would agree with that, I think, judging by the show of hands I had. How do you find out the extent of the deception? Are there layers of deception set up and managed by the perpetrators to hide the truth for as long as possible? I would never have thought of it like that up until maybe the last just over a year or two. Can those of us who know that World Trade Centers 1, 2 and 7 were not destroyed by planes, jet fuel and gravity have been fooled more than once? Perhaps it is unsettling to consider that the answer to that question might be yes. In fact, I would say categorically from where I'm standing, it is a paramount yes. Seeing the illusion. I don't know who's seen this picture before, but I'm going to point out something about it. It's a nice lakeside scene, you know, quite peaceful, quite interesting, bit arty. Probably it's not a real picture, but you know, nice painting or something. So we go on. Once something has been pointed out, you can't help but see it. Perhaps you never saw the shape of the baby in the picture. Here's the baby. There's its head, its nose, and there's its foot. Okay? So I've really just shown this to say once you saw it, you remember it. You remember this picture now, and it will almost be impossible for you to look at the picture again without seeing the picture of the baby once you've become familiar enough with it. In other words, once you've seen the pattern in the data, that picture is data, a new picture emerges. In other words, initially it was just a lakeside scene with some trees, but now you've seen the picture of the baby and there's more information in that picture than you initially realised. That's my point. So how do we find the truth? How do we know what's true and what isn't true? In order to find the truth of something, we should spend as much time as we can gathering information, and I'm going to repeat this several times throughout this presentation because it's a key concept that I'm trying to get across. Examining pertinent evidence, okay? Before deciding on some conclusions. Most people have only examined the hijacker story and what they've been told on the news. So hijacker's done it, end of story. Don't think anymore. I have been attempting myself to collect information and evidence related to 9/11 since about August 2004, and some of my initial conclusions have changed substantially on seeing new evidence. And I make a simple parallel here with court cases, for example. Court cases, investigations, etc. are sometimes reopened and appeals are initiated when new evidence comes to light. And that's what I'm going to be showing some of you tonight who've not already seen some of the stuff that I brought with me. It's the new evidence. You always have to be on the lookout for new evidence. And if you don't look at it, you won't find the truth. We can establish what did not happen. By studying the evidence carefully, we can have a better chance of saying certainly what did not happen, even if we can't always say exactly what did happen. In some cases, laws of physics can be used to establish what cannot and cannot have happened. We can check the consistency of a set of evidence to see if it obeys scientific laws, which we know are consistent through experiment. This includes things like the law of gravity. and also the properties of materials. That will come up soon, hardness and softness. Is one material harder than another? Does one material turn to a dust suddenly for no reason when you set fire to it? People who are not familiar with physical laws and how they dictate what is and is not possible in our 3D physical reality can more easily be fooled by illusions. People who are familiar with physical laws can also be fooled, as I was for 3 years. Now, my background is actually in software engineering. I worked in software engineering for about 20 years. That's writing computer programs, designing computer programs. So one of the things I had to do was process a lot of technical information and come up with some solutions to a problem, which is really, these sorts of skills are quite useful in doing this sort of research. Software engineering, you have to be a bit of a detective, and you also have to be quite creative in your thinking. And if you come to a brick wall and you've got somebody expecting you to solve the problem, you have to either work a way of knocking through the brick wall, climbing over it, or going round it. So that's where my background is. I don't do much programming anymore. They tend to want young graduates, but I still do bits and pieces. So I was fooled for 3 years because I didn't look at the evidence. That's why I was fooled. People who don't take time to look at the evidence will be fooled, and others who don't want to see the implications will just go into denial, and we experience that all the time. And the other thing that I'd like to bring out tonight, because I'm going to be talking about some people as well as what happened on 9/11, is the importance of studying people's history and behaviour. As well as evidence of physical events, witness testimony and behaviour are also important, or is also important. The actions of those studying and presenting the evidence should also be continually scrutinised so that a track record can be built up. You've got to do your own intelligence in this game, because there's a lot at stake and a lot of forces are working against you finding the truth. So I apply that to myself. Go and check me out. Come and ask me a question. I'll answer any question that I can. Okay? About me, my history, where I've come from, where I grew up. You can ask me anything. I don't mind. Now, what you should watch for carefully, particularly with what's going on with some of the stuff that I've been doing, is when one person starts to attack another, and the way that that attack is made and done and orchestrated. So I have a friend in the audience, and he has, watch out, he says, watch out for them playing the man, not the ball. That's a good way of putting it. So you've got to look at the data. Forget all the distraction of name calling. This person is, is just silly, or they're stupid, or what they're saying is stupid. Check it for yourself. Now, a couple of things here. Most of the photos I'm going to show tonight have come from Dr. Judy Wood. Dr. Judy Wood is probably the person who's done the most research into 9/11 of anyone. She has looked at about probably 10 or 15,000 different photographs, mainly from the World Trade Center, which has been the focus of her study, which I think reveals most of the larger secrets that I want to talk about tonight. And she's posted these pictures on her website. A lot of people attack these pictures, but they tell their own story, and it's rather that different to that than in most of the books, the Griffin books and the Tarpley books. It's very much different to the story to what's told in those. Some people think that NIST have kept all the interesting photos and videos of 9/11 for themselves. Well, if that was true, I wouldn't have them with me tonight to show you, would I? So we can debunk that one straight away, or by the end of tonight I'll have debunked it. So I just want to make some acknowledgements here. I want to talk about this with Dr. Judy Wood. I'll mention her name probably a few times. Dr. Morgan Reynolds. I also have to acknowledge what he's been doing. People like Rosalie Grable, who goes under the pseudonym of Web Fairy, done a lot of work on the video fakery. She was one of the early people to come up with the research about the planes hitting the World Trade Center. Other no-planes researchers, even though some of them have tended to adopt a more adversarial stance, shall I say, against various people mentioned here, including me. They have collected the evidence and stood by an analysis of it as individuals rather than a group. That, I think, is also important. I'd just like to make it clear, I don't speak for Morgan Reynolds, I don't speak for Judy Wood, I don't speak for any group, I speak for me. Okay, so you can take it or leave it, basically. I don't claim any authority other than I have a technical background for studying the information that I'm showing you tonight. Some of it is very easy to, you don't need a technical background to see it, as you'll see. Okay, so a quick review of events before 9/11. Previous false flag plans. False flag equals commit an atrocity and blame it on someone else and frame them. Starts in the playground. You know, he did it, miss. You know, he kicked the ball through the window, it wasn't me. It's what they've done with 9/11 with the Muslims. Everyone's probably heard of this, or most people have probably heard of this. Project for the New American Century. This group published a document called Rebuilding America's Defences in the year 2000, and it states on page 2 that PNAC is a project to promote American global leadership. Okay, and you can download this document off the internet, the whole thing. On page 63, it says, the process of transformation of the US military, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalysing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And for people that have studied 9/11, this is probably one of the first phrases that they come across. And quite a few people have heard of this document, although questions have been raised about this more recently. An author called James Bamford, I think it was either just before or just after 9/11, I think it was year 2000, 2001, possibly late 2001, he uncovered a previously classified evidence of a planned false flag operation called Operation Northwoods. This was a plan to rally support for an attack on Cuba by creating a staged attack on American citizens and blame it on Cuba. But was this released to get people to think in terms of remote-controlled planes and drones? Because that's what it talks about. James Bamford doesn't really speak about 9/11 despite talking about stuff like this. Certainly somebody I know commented that this document seems to have some inconsistencies in the language. For example, they use the word holiday instead of vacation. Now, I don't know I've done a lot of analysis of that, but it's just a peculiar thing which I think you'll see how that meshes into what I'm going to tell you later on. Now, the first things to point out that on 9/11 were 3 buildings were destroyed. Last week we had another BBC travesty of a documentary where they talked about the third building, Building 7, to go down, which wasn't hit by anything. A lot of people saying that's controlled demolition. I don't think it was controlled demolition. But I'm not going to talk about World Trade Center 7 much. I've got some pictures, but not the focus of this. Actually, the whole of the World Trade Center complex was destroyed. All buildings which had a WTC prefix were destroyed. Some of them were left standing a bit, like World Trade Center 6 and 4. 6 was left sort of standing with a big hole in the middle. But these two, Towers 1 and 2, were completely destroyed. Now, is that a building collapsing? You hear this collapse. World Trade Center collapsed. It collapsed. I said it for probably 4 or 5 years. I'll still say it. I'll probably say it tonight without thinking it. You know, this idea, collapse, it's put into your head by repetition, like so many other things. Now, Judy Wood was able to get around this idea of collapse. She said it's turning to dust. It's dusty fine. Now, I've got a degree in computer science and physics. Do I need to have that to tell you that that building is turning to dust, or can you see it for yourself? Now, I'm not asking, I'm not going to take a vote or anything. That's a rhetorical question. It's turning to dust. We'll come back to this. Let's see if this works. Yeah, it's just a little sequence. This is called the Spire. This will run twice. We're going to see this 2 or 3 times tonight. 70 stories high.
There are no words.
What's happening to it?
You can see large pieces of the building falling. You can see the smoke rising.
Is it turning to dust, or is it burning up? Is it turning to dust? Is it just falling down? What's it doing?
Now just being covered on the right side.
Turning to dust.
Look at it.
Some people disagree. Now that's up to them. Steel girders. Well, I'm saying it's steel girders. Well, stop me. What is it? What is it? Is it wood? Is it glass? Is it steel? Is it office chairs? Is it toilets? What is it? Looks like steel to me because we know that there was a steel core in the building. And also, I'm just going to briefly talk about Building 7 here. Now, the thing that Judy Wood has pointed out that not many people have really, it's a very neat demolition. Very, very neat. And it was actually, if it was controlled demolition, Building 7 was 100 feet taller than the tallest building ever taken down with controlled demolition before in history. And there you can see it's barely across the street. See? There's a gap there. 47-storey building, barely across the street. It's a pretty good job. 6 seconds, gone. I'm not going to play the film because it's been played over and over. Now then, where's the rubble? Now then, this is a key picture. This is probably one of the most important pictures to do with 9/11 research, I think. We call it intermission, that's the name we've given to it. The reason why we call it intermission is towers 1 and 2 are gone. But we know that that's tower 7. And we know that tower 7 went down at 5:20 in the evening. Or 5:22 or something, I can't remember the exact time. It's given us 5:20, 5:30, 5:22, 5:18. So we know that that's on 9/11. That picture was taken maybe 2 in the afternoon, something like that. And let's just see if this animation works. That's the rubble pile from 2 towers. Now that, I think, is either 6 or 8 stories. I can't remember. This is from Judy's presentation, this picture. So you can see the comparison there. Where's it gone? China? By 2 o'clock? Went to China by 2? Okay, you know, if you want to accept that as the reason that Giuliani and he got all the trucks ready and they carried all that 500 miles of steel. I calculated the total length of steel in the World Trade Center laid end to end. The horizontal and vertical sections of steel. 550 miles of steel. I've got a little article about that in the booklet, how I calculated it. It's easy to work out. If you can do basic maths, you can work it out yourself. So how I became involved. Quick run through. Late 2003, became suspicious. Woke up 2004. Did a small film showing 2 people turned up, a local pub. I wrote letters to MPs when all these terrorism laws were starting to come in. I saw Jimmy Walter and William Rodriguez May 2005, organised a Shayla Mashon event in Derby where I've come up from, 2005 December, that went off quite well. I joined Scholars for 9/11 Truth in December 2005 and I organised 2 William Rodriguez events in February 2007, one in Derby, one in Birmingham. I've been on the local radio about 3 times, just short things, nothing significant really. I also got a 9/11 article actually published in, I work part-time for the Open University, tutor on a course. I actually got an article published in the faculty magazine thanks to a contact there. And I believe, I could be wrong, it's the only 9/11 article published in any UK university publication, I think. I can't swear to that. I've got a copy of that article. That's all on the internet, so you can go to the OU website and find it. That's all linked from my website if you want to find it. I've given out loads of discs. I've got a load there, so come and get them. Blah blah. So that's you know what I've been doing. And in terms of the sort of scientific type of thing or technical, this was a summary of what I've done. We'll skip through this quite quickly. It's just to show you that it's there. You know, there's a bit of maths, but basically it's the free fall argument. You can tell just by looking at the destruction, this wasn't a normal destruction. And I first saw this in George Humphrey's film, so I worked it out myself, this little calculation. Towers were approximately 1,350 feet, actually 1,362 and 68. One tower went in about 10 seconds, the other in about 8 or 9 seconds, and so they're recorded. Now, if you look at the construction again, think of the justification. How did that happen? This was the construction. 47 interior columns, 236 exterior columns, gone, 10 seconds. Pancake collapse. Well, that's what the BBC tell you. So it's a pancake collapse. Melting steel caused trusses in the building to weaken. Steel beams softened and building underwent a pancake collapse. Collapse again, you see, word. Each floor fell onto the next, and the increasing weight of the floors caused a catastrophic structural failure. Now what we've got here is something that's factually incorrect. You can go and look it up in the textbook. And that's still on the BBC website. Steel melts at 1,500 degrees centigrade. But we're not going to talk about melting steel. A lot of people want to talk about that, but there's no heat. There's no heat. We had a dust cloud that came past people. They coughed a bit, they didn't get burnt. There's virtually no fire once the towers had collapsed. There's no heat to melt that steel, and I'll come on to why there wasn't. We can say safely there wasn't any heat, but there were some fires. So this is just a very quick run through some of the sort of equations. It's to do the equations of motion. Law of falling bodies, which is from Galileo, and the law of gravity, Isaac Newton 300 years ago. Distance travelled s is equal to the initial velocity u multiplied by the travel time t, added to half of the acceleration a multiplied by the square of the travel time. That's s equals ut plus half at squared, which I learnt when I was about, I don't know, about 15, 16, something like that at school. And then we can say that the initial velocity is 0 because the object that started falling at the top of the tower was stationary when it started. So you just get, instead of it being ut, that becomes 0, so it's s equals half at squared. In considering the twin towers, we want to find out how long it would take for an object, e.g. a ball bearing, drop from the top of the towers to reach the ground. We then compare this time to the measured time for the quote-unquote collapse. We have to use that word again. We rearrange our previous equation so that we can find out what t would be if we knew all the other values, and it comes out as this. T equals square root of 2s over 8. So the distance that the ball bearing would travel is 1,350 feet approximately, and that's 411.48 metres. A is the acceleration due to Earth's gravity, which is 9.81 metres per second squared. And that gives us a way of calculating t, which gives you 9.16 seconds. So we know that the towers came down very close to the rate of free fall. In other words, as I think Erin said, it's not possible for the towers to have come down through themselves as it is through the air, because they had all that structure to resist the collapse. So that's basically what she said. So anyway, so that's really that type of thing was what got me into this scholars group. Scholars for 9/11 Truth. And as somebody in the audience here pointed out to me, his suspicions were aroused with this symbol, the torch. So I sort of had that in the side of my mind, even though I was hopeful that it didn't mean what he said it did, but I think it turned out he was right. After the physics forum thread, because I posted that I just showed you the maths, on a physics forum which is supposedly frequented by people who are familiar with those sorts of things. You know, I don't expect everyone in the audience to have followed that. It was just purely an illustration. And that thread ran to 900 pages and something like 5,000 responses on that thread before they closed it. I can't remember the exact figures. It's still on there if you go and look at it, if you Google it and stuff. So following that, December 2005, I got an email from Professor Stephen E. Jones inviting me to join this Scholars for 9/11 Truth group. And I sort of said, oh, well, you know, yeah, I can join, but, you know, I'm only a part-time tutor for the Open University. I haven't really got any, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professor, I've only got a lowly graduate's degree, bachelor's degree. So I got involved with the Scholars group, emailed Steve Jones, I helped him with a couple of video clips, there were a couple of other people doing that. I've put a lot of this video material together myself that you'll see shortly. I've got some videos to show you, and so on. And I got in touch with Kevin Ryan, who is the guy who was fired from Underwriters Laboratories. I converted his PowerPoint presentation into a Google video for him, things like that. And I assumed that Scholars for 9/11 Truth would gain some traction. I'm thinking, oh yeah, we've got some scholars on the go now. You know, things are going to start happening. Steve Jones published his paper, Why Indeed Did the Twin Towers Collapse? Collapse, that word again. November 2005. A few revisions were made. I made a couple of small comments. But I thought this Jones guy was an honest guy. Posted a few other articles. This Jim Fetzer guy, who you'll hear a bit more about, he was the co-founder of the Scholars Group. Jim Fetzer has done a lot of research into the Kennedy assassination. He's written books on that. I thought Jim Fetzer was a good guy. I would like to think he's a good guy now, but unfortunately I can't. Works such as Dr. Judy Wood's billiard ball example, which was kind of like a more sophisticated version of what I've just shown you, with more illustrations and more kind of meat behind it to beef it up. Her work was also published in June, July 2005, and it was actually presented at an engineering conference in June 2006. And then Morgan Reynolds came on the scene with his paper, We Have Some Holes in the Plane Stories. That was also, I think, early 2006 that he first posted that. And that was about this question about the holes in the World Trade Center being the wrong width for the planes, this sort of thing. Now, what started to happen in the scholars group is I started posting stuff. I was getting to know a few of the people. But I noticed there was this very big argument going on about this, what happened to the planes at the World Trade Center, and Morgan Reynolds' piece about how these holes were too big for the planes or too small, I can't remember which way around it was, and all these sorts of things. And I hadn't really studied his paper yet, I just hadn't had time, I was caught up in other things. And also Judy Wood's BBE, billiard ball example, that also wasn't really discussed very much. And at first I sort of thought, well, it doesn't really matter because, we're just trying to show that 9/11 is an inside job. And we've got to get the public to understand that because, the BBC is not telling us the truth. So I didn't really make such a big deal of it. And, people say this to me now, why is it important? Who cares whether, it's planes or no planes? We know that Bush is responsible. That's the thing we've got to get across to people. That's the key thing. Well, I've changed my mind now. So what I want to talk about now for a couple of minutes is examples of media fakery. Do the media deliberately broadcast fake information? Let's see if this works.
U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush pushes for a land war against Iraq. But polls show the U.S. public is split 50-50 on that idea. Then comes this eyewitness testimony before a congressional committee from a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl. The claim is she cannot be identified for fear of reprisals.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
The U.S. public is outraged. The result? Support for land war zooms. It's a turning point. Desert Storm is launched. 135,000 Iraqis are killed. An estimated 1 million Iraqis, many of them children and old people, then die as a result of 10 years of sanctions. One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths. Not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. It's one phase in a $10 million joint U.S.-Kuwaiti campaign of deception. This man is lying.
I myself buried 14 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
This man is lying.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
There were a lot of people who participated in a conspiracy. Yes, an out-and-out conspiracy.
Okay. And the next one that not as many people have heard of as that, I think quite a lot of people have heard of that one, pretty blatant, is a Zapruder film. John Costello, who actually also turns out to be a different person to who I thought he was, have closely analysed the film taken by Abraham Zapruder of the JFK assassination. And as everyone else, I assumed that the film was genuine. This film was not released until 1964. You know the film when I put it on. It's less than 500 frames in this film. It's only about a couple of minutes long or something. Costello documents at least 6 mistakes in this film that was released. And here's 2 of them. The fast forward mistakes, we have an observation where people in the clip break the laws of physics, those laws of physics, or bodily motion. The mistake A occurs when Mrs. Connolly snaps her head to the rear far too rapidly. Just before she does, she turns her head to the right, to the front in a more realistic motion. This might look fast, but compare it to the head snaps of the Secret Service driver of the limousine. These have been analysed scientifically and have shown to be twice as fast as humanly possible, even for an athlete trying to do it as quickly as possible. So if you look where the yellow arrows are pointing in the lower 2 pictures, you'll see that these movements are actually physically impossible to make. I'll leave that up just for a few seconds for people to be comfortable that they've seen it. Just watch where the two arrows are pointing after the clip's paused for a minute. Physically impossible to move heads that fast. Okay? Another mistake. The wound mistake. The Zapruder film is telling us that the whole front top of JFK's head gets blasted away. There's a huge crater where his forehead used to be, through which his wife can be seen. This would make sense if he was indeed hit by a high-velocity rifle bullet from behind. The only problem is that everyone who saw the president after the shooting said that his face was not injured or damaged at all. JFK autopsy photographs surfaced in the late 80s and showed his face to be completely intact. Even the skeptics have to agree that either the Zapruder film or the autopsy photos or both have to be forgeries. Okay? So we've got an example there of media fakery. They deliberately made a fake film and put it out about a year after the Kennedy assassination. Why did they do that? Why would they put out a fake film like that? Anybody got any guesses? Well, part of to mask the real truth and where the shooting really took place. But also one of the key things which they did, and I didn't really make it clear with what I showed you there, is that some of you read about this may know that the witnesses in Dealey Plaza said, car came in, slowed down to a stop, Kennedy was shot, the driver put his foot down, and off the car went. If you watch that as a Zapruder film, it shows the car in continuous motion. The reason being that they deleted some of the frames. They deleted some of the frames from the version that they released. And that thereby discredited all those witnesses who said that the car stopped. Their testimony instantly became unreliable because the camera never lies, right? Okay, so we're now going to the plane fakery issue, mainly at the World Trade Center. Pentagon's different, Shanksville's different. We don't really have that many witnesses to a plane at Shanksville. The witness stories at Pentagon are much more confused. But some people say, no big bones at the World Trade Center. Ridiculous. I recently read this in a book by Laura Knight Yadzik, about page 93. Most sincere 9/11 researchers agree planes crashed at the World Trade Center. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm an insincere 9/11 researcher, folks. I stopped reading that book at page 93, and I've not really got the will to read it anymore. You'll probably find out why soon, hopefully. But we all saw plane hits. We saw it on the videos, didn't we? Lots of them. We saw the no-day footage, didn't come out until the day afterwards. First impact. One of only about 3 places in New York where they could have filmed it, that footage. We saw multiple videos of the second impact. Lots of them. All the people have their own video cameras rolling. What are you saying? What am I saying, everyone? Computer graphics? Holograms? Never believe in the public, you know. I'm damaging the truth campaign. Sorry. That's the basic argument against what I'm telling you. And there are other things too, of course. I'm simplifying it a bit, but that's the thrust of what a lot of it is said. So let's have a look at the evidence. Evidence. My website, check the evidence. Not check the conspiracy theory, check the evidence. A reminder, to find the truth, we have to keep looking at the evidence. We should always be on the lookout for new evidence, new studies. We should check it when possible against known physical laws and established data. So in the words of no ordinary genius Richard Feynman, what does the data say? Well, let's have a look, shall we? Okay, so the problem there is there's an explosion after the plane enters the building. Now you go and try and debate that on the internet, and people say, oh, the plane was travelling so fast it created a vacuum and the fuel was sucked in so it didn't ignite before, you know, blah, 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 blah. No. No. If you have a lot of petrol or kerosene and a huge impact like that, you're going to get a fireball. Now, if that was the only evidence that no planes hit the World Trade Center, then, you know, you could be forgiven for sort of trying to debate it, but of course the story doesn't end there. We're now going to look at the video I referred to in that. It's another quick video. It's a bit of a mishmash this. Somebody else did this one. It's about the second impact live shot. That's basically it. There's a bit more to that, but that's the bit I want to show you. In other words, the live shot of the second World Trade Center impact was filmed by Fox TV with a military camera system, Westcam. Okay, look at this. Anyone remember the passport story? Guy's passport that survived, landed on the pavement. Well, how come, excuse me, but, hello, how come that rubber tyre looks pretty well inflated? The one on the left is obviously not inflated, it's cut in half. Survives a huge impact of those two planes. So I don't have a problem with that. I certainly have a problem with that. Now, you know, I'm not talking about physics or, you know, technical science. I have a problem with that in the same way I have a problem with the passport story. And that's the evidence that the government has offered to say that a plane crashed at the World Trade Center, or one of them. About this one, you're probably not going to see this one. It's picked up by Judy Wood. This was dated 25th of October 2001, this picture. Top of World Trade Center 5. We're going to come to these features here later. But this thing here. Was this planted? If you look at this, I've tried to label the sections here. This is from a satellite picture on the right here. And you can actually see some of these pieces because it's in the same place. You can see I've tried to line them up. But this was taken before the 25th of October. The picture on the right, the blurred one. Looks like that was put there sometime in between 9/11 and the 25th of October. Planted piece of fuselage. Now this is a good one as well. How can aluminium and like materials crash through solid steel girders? Purdue University have done a lovely study, a nice computer animation, showing these, you know, 1/4-inch aluminium wing struts slicing through these steel girders. Sorry, but that's not possible. And the only analogy I can give you, well, I can give you lots of analogies, but one of them is what would happen if you fired a 0.44 Magnum bullet, according to Dirty Harry, the most powerful handgun in the world, at a steel girder. Now, you've got a lead bullet, which is denser and flying faster than a Boeing. What would it do if you fired that at a steel girder? It might make a bit of a, yeah, ricochet. It'd make a bit of a dent in it, a bit of a mark, but it ain't going to go through it. So how can a plane wing go through it? Forget about the engines. You can clearly see these girders all sliced through. Not possible. Not possible. Whatever people tell you on the internet, think of the heart. You know, get an aluminium stick. Go to metal dealers, sheet metal worker. Get some aluminium. Get a lump of steel. Hit it against it as hard as you can. What comes off worst? The aluminium. Every time. Doesn't matter how fast it travels. Boeings cannot travel at 540 miles an hour at sea level. The air is too thick. That's the official speed of impact of one of the planes, 540. Not possible for them to travel at that speed. Sorry? 240? I've heard 320, I think. It's not possible. Can you see a plane inside? No plane parts hanging out, no tail, no engines, no wing, wing bits, nothing. It would bounce off. It cannot penetrate. If the military could penetrate structures with Boeings, why did they ever bother to use depleted uranium, which is known for its penetrating power because of its density and its hardness? You just use Boeing. If you can do that to steel structures, you just use a Boeing, much cheaper. You know, get them second hand as well. You know, EasyJet when they finish with them or whatever. Just fire a few of them at Iraq, you know. Utter devastation. I made my point, I think. Yeah, then. But all the witnesses, they saw them, everyone. They all saw claims. Come on, you're lying to me, Andrew. You're just making this up. You're just, you know, it's just your ego at work here, man. You've got a problem with your ego. The witnesses all saw it. Well, what I did was, and this is, I can count this as my bit of original research, I came to understand that in 2005, 500 witness accounts were released under a Freedom of Information Act. And I've got all this on my website. I'll quickly go through the details. I managed to establish that at least 96 witnesses were near the World Trade Center within half a mile. These are the first responders, the emergency workers, police, firemen, emergency medical technicians. 500 accounts I went through using keyword search. And a total of 117 witnesses I found who were at or near the World Trade Center buildings at the time of second impact. Basically, I looked at the accounts. I looked for where they said, we parked our vehicle at Vesey Street, West Street, Church Street, whatever. Looked how close they were to the actual World Trade Center buildings, and I included those accounts in my study. 19 of the witnesses near the World Trade Center actually reported seeing the second impact. This is all to do with the second impact, because obviously the first one, people didn't know what was going on. It was obviously the second one where they should have known what was going on. A lot of interesting things have come out of this study, and I could do another study on it. There's so much stuff in these witness accounts. Only 20% of witnesses saw the second plane. And only 20 witnesses near the World Trade Center reported actually hearing the plane. Only 8 of the witnesses near the World Trade Center actually reported seeing and hearing the plane. And these are the people who were actually there, on the ground, you know, fixing people, pulling people out. Those are the people that were there, not people who are on television, you know, people's friend, you know, all this. Now, Jim Fetzer, who was a co-founder of the Scholars Group, he complimented me on this study. I went on his radio program. I've got all that on my website and everything. He thought it was good. Thought I'd done a good job. Other people thought I'd done a good job. But you've probably not heard about this study very much. And 2 particular accounts I'll give you just here quickly, sections of. Scott Hollowatch. He was like, he was stood next to Chief Gansey, I don't know how to pronounce it. Hollowatch is saying, he was like, no, we have another explosion. I said, no, Chief, I witnessed it. I watched the plane hit the other tower. He's like, are you sure? I said, Chief, I'm 100% positive I watched the second plane hit the tower. 2 guys stood next to each other. They can't agree that the plane hit the tower. They stood next to each other. Firefighter David Sandvik. Page 4. I never heard the motor of the plane, the sound of the engines. Where was he? We just heard the explosion. You felt the explosion. And looking straight up, seeing the fireball you see on your news. But where underneath it? We're looking up at it. He's right under it. Never heard the plane. How's that? How is that? Now I'll just pause a minute at this point to say, I don't think large Boeings, in fact I know large Boeings didn't hit the World Trade Center towers. But that doesn't mean to say I can tell you what did hit, because I can't. I can't tell you that. All I can tell you is that large Boeings did not hit the World Trade Center. And they weren't remote controlled or have pods, all that. No, sorry, it doesn't work. And there's a lot more than this. I've just given you 2. There are quite a few more. And you could probably find some of these for yourself if you went to look. Okay. Just a point at the bottom there. If the planes did indeed crash, then all the video evidence should match perfectly. Especially that from main news outlets. We don't have any video from the main news outlets, from their own cameramen that I know of. It's all amateur shots. The 2 main ones being Evan Fairbanks and Michael Herzakani, who was the one that I did the He Won't Get Fooled Again. That was his film. That wasn't an official, it said CNN on it, but it wasn't one of their official cameramen. It was an amateur film. So this is a second impact, remember, when all the world news media were on the scene. No one's got a good video of the plane coming in. And yeah, precisely. If you look into it, you'll find all these strange things. So, if there were no plane crashes at all, anywhere, which I think is correct. We know everyone's queers a plane at the Pentagon. Most people would say it's a missile. I'm not sure if there's a missile or what it was, but if there are no planes at all involved in 9/11, no real planes, it means no hijackers. It explains the anomalies of the passenger list, which is also very difficult. You can't get a passenger list very easily if you try. I know people that have tried that and you get conflicting passenger lists. One was released and another one was released. There was no stand down. All this talk you hear about stand down, it's just noise. There's nothing to it. It explains the flight anomalies quite well. Callum Douglas has done a study with Flight 77 data and he came to the conclusion that it had to be faked because the NTSB flight data said that the plane didn't go below 180 feet off the ground. But if no plane hit the Pentagon, that's true. That would add up. It explains the surviving hijackers because there weren't any hijackers, so they all survived because there were no hijackers involved. It explains the fake NORAD tapes because they were known to have been fake. Came out. David Ray Griffin did that study. That was about 18 months ago. He said, "Oh, these NORAD tapes must be fake because of what they were saying on them." Well, if there were no planes, they must have had to have faked the NORAD tapes for the plane stories to have some kind of substance to it. Operators were watching radar blips. The operators didn't actually see the planes physically. And if they have, they haven't given any witness testimony under oath, to my knowledge. And it indicates another layer of cover-up. David Ray Griffin talks about planes. Steve Jones talks about planes. Most 9/11 researchers talk about planes at the World Trade Center. They'll probably agree a plane wasn't involved at the Pentagon. And the key DVD that I've got back there, copies of, or you can watch it on the internet, September Clues, that's the study which will show you this. What do you mean by stand down? The stand down was where they said that because the planes weren't intercepted, they should have been shot down due to the rules. If a plane is off course for more than, I think, 45 minutes or 15 minutes, it should be intercepted to see what's happening and shot down if it poses a risk to property or life or whatever. And so the theory is in the 9/11 truth community that the military must have been ordered not to shoot the planes down because they actually hit the World Trade Center. There was a sufficient delay of time for them, the later planes to be shot down, but they weren't shot down. So somebody in the military must have given an order for them not to be shot down. In other words, a stand down. So here's my view of what might have happened with the 9/11 plane issue. Quite a number of military exercises were going on, according to people like Webster Tarpley. I think there's 15 different military exercises involving planes were going on, which is probably true. I think that could well be true. Some general or military high-up dude rings up and says to somebody high up in the command structure, "Oh, there's 4 planes have been hijacked. Planes are in the air, get on it." NORAD, the FAA and everyone spend 1 or 2 hours looking for them, but they're not there. There's no real planes. All they can see is fake radar blips for these military exercises that are going on. Nothing is scrambled because there's no planes to intercept. So they don't know where to send these interceptor planes. It's not a stand down, there's just no targets for them to actually intercept. No real targets. Everyone feels bad because the non-existent planes have managed to destroy the World Trade Center, part of the Pentagon. How can that happen? No one will admit to anything because it's a huge cock-up. None of the military, none of the FAA will admit to anything because somebody has injected a false story into the system. A false story so blatantly false that everyone believes it. And few realise what did the damage at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. So the myth begins. And we're going to say what did the damage to the World Trade Center. And this is a very important point. The media are fully complicit. They know, some of them know, that they had to be involved with this to pull off the 9/11 illusion. So the media are as guilty as Bush. The Fox TV executives are as guilty as Bush. BBC TV executives are as guilty as Bush. Okay? Right. So, destruction of the World Trade Center. If there were no planes were there to do the damage, what did do the damage? Dust and destruction. Carpet of dust on the road, maybe ankle deep, and dust in the air in the background. Here. How were all the girders destroyed? You remember the picture earlier? Maybe I should have put it on this slide to make it clearer. 236 exterior steel columns. 47 interior steel columns. Steel, not concrete. Well, there was concrete as well, but there was steel. Toilets, computers. Seeing that picture on the left, look at this one. Rubble pile from World Trade Center 1, essentially non-existent. The ambulance is parked at ground level in front of the World Trade Center there. Where's the buildings go? 2 of them. 110-story buildings, folks. Where'd they go? Missing in action. Oh, they all went into the basements. Anyway, right, this is going back to the start. I've got a little video here. Professor Stephen E. Jones says it shakes and falls. In that little clip, I've got another video clip here. It's 70 stories unsupported. That thing you saw earlier on. We're going to see another clip of it now repeated. What do you think, folks? I'll leave you to make your own mind up. I've stressed the point several times.
I think it's important to quantify this statement and not advert ultra-fine things such certification, colorization. It gives the wrong impression. It's time for the community to get quantitative, Jim, and to get data and to agree on published data and studies that actually measure these things. For instance, you mentioned this fire. So that I would like to talk about, this fire that appears. I mean, when the North Tower comes in? Yes. Does it fire? It looks like it does fire. See, that's your term again. But in fact, if you look at another, Alex, in fact, brought up another video clip, and if you look at that, what happens is this fire, as it stands there for a few seconds, it is certainly covered with dust. Everything else is covered with dust, and it does shake. And there's a piece of it that starts to bend over in the other clip. You see it. That's what happens. Let me finish. You cut me off. That's not nice. Finish here, please. About that one, that used to be built. Here's the fire standing there for several seconds, and what you see is it shakes, and there's dust that forms, and then the metal starts to move. The metal portion here of this tower that was standing starts to fall. It doesn't dustify, Jim. What happens is it shakes, and this is what I observed. It shakes. Have you looked into the Spectrum Dominant Star Wars Development Project? Have you looked into any of these high-tech weapons? Well, I've just read about it. I've not been involved in any of that. Well, I don't think you have a hypothesis that you've done. I'm not really about Jim. I'm trying to establish basic data. You want to claim that thermite did it. Well, maybe the directed energy weapon could have done it better and is more consistent with the evidence in its totality than your hypothesis. But the explanandum had to cover the sulfidation, which I have not seen the Star Wars method even approach to explain. But we do.
An educated nuclear physicist says that that did not turn to dust. It shakes and falls. That's from an educated nuclear physicist. Another educated physicist, Dr. Greg Jenkins, says that all the debris from the towers went into the basements, and it compressed itself into the basements. He wrote a paper. Now, in case I should perhaps just interject a little bit. There are two kind of camps in 9/11 research. Those based around Stephen E. Jones and his thermite theory, thermite, thermate, nanothermate, superthermate, and Dr. Wood's research, which I've been involved in on tangentially, and I'll come to that in a bit. No thermate, no real heat. Now, people say the debris went into the basements. Well, you can see there's some of the basements. Can you see the debris compacted down? Thousands of steel girders. So it went to China. That's one story. The second story is it went into the basements. I showed you the picture with the absence of debris with the World Trade Center 7 in the background. There's the basements. This is under the basements in the malls. These are the mall stores, some of them here. Any debris there? There's a few bits of cable, bits of, just small debris. No steel girders there that I can see. They're walking around in there. What happened to these? Toasted cars. Look at this. all wilted, all the metal's wilted. This tyre's gone, this one's intact. Where'd the engine block go? What's happened to the tyre? It's turned to goo, but there's some paintwork there intact. What happened to this ambulance? What about this here? We'll come back to this shortly. What happened to it? That's thermite planted in the building, did that. Jet fuel, gravity collapse, pancake collapse, did this. 1,400 of these vehicles, folks. 1,400. Oh, they were told from next to the World Trade. Well, we'll come back to that. Excuse me. What's this one here? Upside down. Upside down. How does a car turn upside down, everyone? Now, you can forget everything else I've told you. Anybody who does any 9/11 research has to answer my question of how that car turned upside down. Cars do not do that in nature. They do not do that from a pancake collapse. They do not do that because of plane crashes. Oh sure, somebody came along with a crane, tipped it, put a grabber on it, tipped it upside down. In the streets of New York on 9/11, think about it. Don't take my word for it. Think about it yourself. Oh, look at this. Either on 9/11 or soon after. This is a steel truck. Why is it rusty, folks? What's the rust doing there? Very rapid rusting. That's caused by kerosene, thermite? No way. What's going on here? Now this looks like, you just think, oh well, yeah, we knew the World Trade Center blew up and that's just the wreckage from it. Well, look carefully. This is what I mean about Judy Wood being a good observer. If you look carefully, you'll see soil, landfill even, all over this scene. Landfill. Why has somebody gone in and put soil on top of the debris, landfill or potting compost? What's going on? Here, look. This looks like it's landfill. Poured on top of the debris. Why would you do that? Why do you go into the disaster scene? We've got pictures of, I haven't got them in this presentation, we've got pictures of this landfill dirt being trucked in. On top of the fire truck. How does soil and potting compost get on top of a fire truck? This is evidence, folks, evidence. Look at the evidence. Here it is. You can say to me, Andrew, these pictures are fake and I know it. Okay, tell me why they're fake. I want to have your reasons. This is actually on World Trade Center Building 7. More landfill. Why do they put landfill on top of the remains of World Trade Center 7? What's it doing there? That takes a physical effort when they should be rescuing people. Okay, directed energy weapons. Dr. Judy Wood said some type of energy destroyed the World Trade Center. So I've shown you a bit of evidence and there is more. So let's take it to those who know about directed energy weapons. Anyone ever heard of these? The Directed Energy Professional Society, DEPS, founded in 1999. They're all into making directed energy weapons. And you're going to see some more examples of this later, so I'm going to skip through this. Now then, what we find is, if you look at the contractors that help NIST, NIST is the National Institute for Standards in Technology, and they produced 10,000 pages of reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center. 10,000 pages. They didn't do it themselves, they used some contractors. And among those contractors was Applied Research Associates, Science Applications International Corporation, and Boeing. And they're all defense contractors, would you believe? NIST should have known that ARA, Applied Research Associates, is a significant manufacturer of directed energy weapons and all components thereof. Go and have a look on their website if you don't believe me. They don't hide it. ARA make directed energy weapons, and yet they were one of the people that helped compile the World Trade Center reports for NIST. Does that strike anyone as odd? Science Applications International Corporation, I first came across them in 2003. in relation to their involvement in black projects, they're given a lot of money by the US government. And Boeing, as a manufacturer of the ABL, the airborne laser, it's described as America's first directed energy weapon. It's not conspiracy theory, this is fact. It's on their websites. They're proud of this. Okay, Norman Mineta, often cited as a 9/11 truther because he accused Cheney of refusing a shoot-down order on the Pentagon plane, hence implicating Cheney in letting the Pentagon attack happen. I think there's several books have got that in it. Here's his testimony.
I wanted to focus just a moment on the Presidential Emergency Operating Center. You were there for a good part of the day. I think you were there with the Vice President. And we had that order given, I think it was by the President, that authorized the shooting down of commercial aircraft that were suspected to be controlled by terrorists. Were you there when that order was given?
No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon. There was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
So he's kind of implicating Cheney in the cover-up, sort of. But, have a look. Prior to joining President Bush's administration, this is off the US government website, one of them, as Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Mineta served as US Secretary of Commerce under President Clinton. He was also, at a previous time, Vice President of Lockheed Martin Corporation, prior to joining the Commerce Department. Now, let's see if it's on this slide. There we go. And Lockheed Martin, they're one of the main contractors for the airborne laser. It's on their website. It's a directed energy weapon. Interesting, eh? That's how we go on. Now, when Judy Wood had made this conclusion that some type of energy weapon was used to destroy the World Trade Center, which I'm going to come more onto, we were criticised, she was criticised a lot because a lot of people said, no, you can't be right because you can't say it was this type of laser or that type of laser. And Jim Fetzer was often saying, oh, it's got to be a maser or a plasmoid. No, Judy Wood said none of that. She didn't say it was a laser. She didn't say it was a space weapon. She said it was a directed energy weapon. And she wrote to this, I won't read it all out, but she wrote to the Kirtland Air Force Base Directed Energy Directorate. The Air Force does have a Directed Energy Directorate based at Kirtland Air Force Base, and she wrote to the head of it, Susan J. Thornton. She got a fax back from a guy called Rich Garcia. He's been in a couple of documentaries, actually. He's like the spokesman for the Directed Energy Directorate. In that fax, in response to basically what Judy Wood did, she wrote to Kirtland Air Base and said, I think directed energy weapons were used to destroy the World Trade Center. Can you give me any more information? That's basically what she said. All this is on a website. This was the response, or part of it. You report phenomena that we cannot explain here, either because we don't have enough data or because the phenomena are not within our area of expertise. In other words, Kirtland Air Force Base, did not say Al-Qaeda done 9/11. They said the pictures that she'd sent them, they couldn't explain them. Now then, we wanted to put some of this information together last year and go on a radio program called We Ourselves. Ambrose Eileen, who's sort of become a friend of ours. This was in the States. Ambrose Eileen invited Dr. Judy Wood and me onto his show We Ourselves on the 27th of July to discuss this last year some of this evidence. In other words, the Mineta stuff, directed energy stuff, some of the things I've been showing you, not the plain stuff, but the pictures and so forth. And Ambrose had a large audience on the Power XM channel. And we were suggesting that people like Michael Chertoff were talking up Al-Qaeda nukes as a cover for using Jew again. In other words, our theory at that time, and I still hold this as true, we've heard a lot of talk about Al-Qaeda nukes, being shipped in and planted in various cities and they'd come out of the Ukraine and Al-Qaeda have got them. A lot of people have said that the destruction at the World Trade Center looks like a nuclear bomb went off, and indeed it does in many respects. But there are lots of reasons why we know that a nuclear bomb didn't go off. But it was a nuclear process, I think. So Al-Qaeda was saying Chertoff was saying Al-Qaeda were going to set off nukes. We wanted to point out that if they had this advanced weaponry, we knew not how it works, they could use it to fake a nuclear attack and say that Al-Qaeda set off a nuke when actually it wasn't, it was some type of energy weapon. Ambrose Lane was fired from his show on the day we were due to go on last year. He has still got another show, a local one in Washington DC, which I'll come to later. But he was fired. He was driving into his parking space apparently and he was fired. I posted this information on the UK forum and I will name this person. Tony Gosling said he'd been fed duff information. He said that radio hosts get fired for discussing 9/11 all the time. So I asked Tony Gosling which other radio hosts have been fired for discussing 9/11 and I'm still waiting for an answer from him. Okay, so what do you do when you've got this evidence? Well, if you're convinced about your evidence, you go under oath for it. You take it to a court of law. And that's what Reynolds and Wood did. That's what they did, they took it to court. Steve Jones hasn't done this. I'll come back to that. And this is just a picture. It started off with a request for correction. This isn't a court action, but this laid the foundation for the court action, which I'll go into now. Wood and Reynolds submitted challenges to NIST under the Data Quality Act. I'll just briefly explain what that is. When we've got this evidence of the no planes that I've shown you, we put it all together into a legal document, you submit it to NIST and say, your reports are fraudulent because you say that planes can penetrate steel girders. We know that that's fraudulent because it breaks Newton's third law. And you say, the buildings collapsed. No, they didn't collapse, they turned to dust. Your report is fraudulent because you don't say the building turned to dust, which is what it did. That's essentially what Judy Wood was saying. She took 50 pages and put all the pictures in. I've got a copy of one of the documents at the back there, the RFC, Request for Correction. Steve Jones's group, Architects for Engineers and 9/11 Truth, or Scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice, they also submitted an RFC, but it was after Judy Wood and Morgan Reynolds did it. And so this was last year, I don't want to read all that out, but basically the Keatam cases were unsealed. Morgan Reynolds in July 2007. You could then talk about the case because all the documents had been submitted and they've all been squared away. So Reynolds could say, I've now sued NIST contractors for fraud. September 2007, Judy Wood's Keatam case. I forget what Keatam means. It means something like against, for the people against the king or something. I forget what it means. She sued NIST contractors for fraud because they said they didn't find any evidence of directed energy weapons, whereas she did. And in June 2008, a few weeks ago, the judge has dismissed both these cases. I'm not going to go into this, so we're still responding to this. But as an additional one by Ed Haas, it was also submitted at the same time, or nearly the same time. The judge, in his dismissal of these three cases, which one was about Building 7, one was about the lack of planes at the World Trade Center, and one was about the destruction of the World Trade Center with directed energy weapons. The judge dismissed all three cases with the same document. And in that document, he mentioned the moon landings and JFK in a judge's court document. He has no need to do that. And you can find all the details about this on the website. So in other words, the summary of this bit is, Wood and Reynolds have taken this court evidence, they've tried to get it into a court, and after about a year it's been dismissed, but there's more to tell you. And they mentioned moon landings in the dismissal, which, you know, has nothing to do with this. Now, Steve Jones's group, I'm going to come more on to talk about this guy, because he's dangerous. He has not sued NIST for anyone, or anyone for fraud. He was one of the kind of, well, it was actually Richard Gage founded this Architects for Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They haven't sued anyone. They submitted an RFC. The RFC submitted by James Gawley, which was for Steve Jones's group, on behalf of Bob McIlvaine, who's one of the family victims, who's in the family of one of the victims. Stephen E. Jones and the others does not mention thermite or molten metal in their RFC. Why? In Judy Wood's document, she talks about directed energy all the way through it. Well, not all the way through it, but that is her summary. That is her conclusion. Steve Jones doesn't mention thermite or molten metal in his RFC, which is a legal document. But yet he talks about that publicly all the time. All the time. Why? So why hasn't he put thermite in his RFC? Why has he not sued them if he's got all this evidence that he claims to have? And now we'll go into a bit more detail on this guy. You've got to know about this guy. I don't like focusing on individual researchers. I'd rather look at the evidence. But I've got to make a serious exception in this case. So your mate, his mate, my mate, her mate. Jones denies fine powder pulverization of WTC materials. You heard him say that the spire did not turn to dust, it shook and fell. No dust involved. So let's have a look. There's a short video here. Apologies to Justin Haywood here. This might crash at this point, so I might have to reset it, but we'll see how we go.
What I would emphasize is that we've learned that with evidence we can learn a great deal. So if there is an event in, gosh, I won't even name a city. Let's just say an American city blamed on Iran. Certainly there will be 9/11 truthers nearby.
Right.
And I hope they realize the importance of collecting a sample, whether that's dust or...
And also having radiation detectors like Loren Moraes.
Right, have a radiation detector handy if you've got one.
Right, and also being...
Geiger, if you send me a sample, I'd be glad to look. Bill, I'm sure you, with your labs, we could look. So if there is such an event, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because it's a bit of a warning. If there are perpetrators thinking about another 9/11, they better think twice, because 9/11 truthers are out there. We're watching. We will get samples. We know what to do. Evidence-based studies we can do very quickly, and we can put an end to lies on the next 9/11 if they're contemplated.
Yeah, I can guarantee
which I hope we'll avoid. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, we've already probably stopped. In fact, a lot of the work that you've done and many other 9/11 truthers, I think,
and Alex Jones,
and all the great leaders. I think what's been done is we probably don't.
So he's suggesting that if there was a nuclear attack blamed on Al-Qaeda, 9/11 truthers should go out and collect dust samples in an irradiated zone with a radiation detector. This is an educated nuclear physicist who worked at Los Alamos National Laboratories for a time. Steve Jones and cold fusion. That's where we get into the energy issue. There's quite a bit about Stephen E. Jones in the late Dr. Eugene Mallow's book about the cold fusion cover-up. It's called Fire from Ice. Back a bit, seems to run slightly out when I move the computer. A year 2000 documentary called Heavy Watergate, which is available on Google Video, has this about Steve Jones.
Since Pons and Fleischman were both well aware of the pitfalls of premature publicity, why would they bypass the accepted conventions of the peer review system and announce their discovery through the media?
I was thinking these guys are no fools. They know what they're doing. These are good scientists.
Prior to the 1989 announcement, Stephen E. Jones, a physics professor at nearby Brigham Young University, learned of Pons and Fleischman's work through an informant at the DOE. In a flagrant example of shameless opportunism, Jones insisted on going public quickly with his comparatively much less clear results. Disparaging the excess heat claims of Fleischman and Pons, Jones' announcement would have effectively prevented the two scientists from patenting their process, a process they had developed on their own over long years of research. On the advice of university attorneys, Pons and Fleischman, feeling their backs to the wall, reluctantly delivered their work to public scrutiny.
So he's involved in energy. So we've got directed energy at the World Trade Center, cold fusion, Steve Jones. Mallow wrote this book from 1991, Fire from Ice. Very interesting book, I've read it. More difficult to get hold of a copy now, you can still get one in some places. It's got about 100 pages where Steve Jones is mentioned on them. And curiously, Mallow was murdered in May 2004. Steve Jones came on the 9/11 scene in September 2005. Now, as I say, I got involved with Steve Jones early on, just through email more than anything. And a while ago, about a year ago, I noticed that Judy Wood had started using this photograph, and I knew I'd seen this somewhere before. And as part of my video work for Steve Jones, he'd sent me a PowerPoint presentation, much as the one I'm showing you now. And in that PowerPoint presentation was this photograph here. And in his presentation, he pointed out this here was a thermite reaction because it was white hot. What he didn't point out was that he doctored the picture. He changed the contrast levels in Photoshop or within the PowerPoint package itself. You can do it. You can barely see these flecks of light here. Here they're much stronger. Why would he do that? Misdirection. Remember me mentioning that? He draws your attention to something. He's an educated nuclear physicist. He says it's thermite. You think, well, he's a physicist. He knows what he's talking about. So I believe him. That's thermite. Thermite took down the towers. Case closed. Stop thinking. Perhaps it's time to consider 9/11 as part of the bigger picture. 9/11 wasn't the new Pearl Harbor, folks, as David Ray Griffin says. 9/11 was the new Hiroshima. This is what Judy Wood says. And I've got a disc back there with her presentation where she goes into a lot more of this detail. There's a lot more to show you, which I haven't got time for tonight. Now then, so what was the directed energy technology that we used? We were lambasted because we couldn't say what it was, despite the fact that people seem happy for Steve Jones to say thermate did 9/11 and other explosives, but Steve Jones can't tell you what other explosives did, blew up the buildings. And his latest one is, would you believe it, paint-on thermite. Paint-on. It was painted on the steel girders, folks. He said that about 4 weeks ago. I've got the recording. Paint-on thermite, that's his latest. So let's have a look here. I mentioned the fires. I said there were no fires. Well, what I meant to say is there were no hot fires. Why is this fireman walking through this burning material, paper? Why are these cars burning and all this paper's not burning here? This is John Hutchison. I'll tell you a bit more about John Hutchison. He's a Canadian scientist who's been doing experiments with field effects for 30 years. And he's able to generate levitation and changes in metal samples. And Judy first came across this, Judy Wood, I think it was probably well over a year ago, but she left it on one side as a possibility. But when we looked at the evidence from the World Trade Center that she had accumulated through the picture record, and we looked at some of the Hutchison effects, we saw a very close correspondence. A lot of people say John Hutchison is a fraud, and I've got a whole 3 booklet about that whole thing. I've spoken to John Hutchison on the telephone for 2.5 hours because I helped him write out an affidavit which we submitted as court evidence for the court cases that have now been dismissed. We're not currently sure what we're going to do with the court cases. But John Hutchison was prepared to submit an affidavit to the court, and he's got supporting documents that Los Alamos National Laboratories visited him. In fact, you'll hear Colonel John Alexander on one of those DVDs saying that he did visit John Alexander. So you can see these fires, orangey colour, no smoke, no obvious fuel for these fires to burn. This is done with a combination of electric and magnetic fields that John is beaming at this sample area from his equipment, old radio equipment and radar equipment and such.
Is that film in real time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about a minute long. Now, this is one of John's metal samples on the left here. I don't need to put any words. This is one of these samples from the World Trade Center wreckage. Pancake collapse, thermate. Steel girder turned into a horseshoe. Very strange. This is one of the other beams from the World Trade Center on the right-hand side. Look at these weird metal effects. You notice any similarities in the flaking and the bending of it? We think it's very similar. And it goes further. Oh look, yet another upside down car. We've got at least 5 pictures of upside down cars. We've got a couple of bits of video. We haven't actually collected all of the ones we can get. We've got enough now to know that there were plenty of cars upside down. This is one of John Hutchison's experiments where he's beaming electrostatic and radio frequency and magnetic fields at his sample area with a Red Bull can, and watch what happens to it. And he's repeated this multiple times, and it's now been replicated as well. So we've got the fires, we've got the metal effects, levitation. I've got another clip, not on here, but it's on the DVD, of him levitating a 70-pound cannonball. 70-pound cannonball. He uses 400 watts of power, it's 4 light bulbs worth, to levitate a 70-pound cannonball. This is a clip I showed you before. This is the result of one of his experiments on the left. I don't think I need to say any more. Metal effects, aluminium. I'm pretty sure that that's aluminium on the ambulance as well, in the skin of it. They could both be steel, I'm not 100% sure, but you can see the similarity of the flaredness and the flakiness and the burnt appearance, but it doesn't appear to be hot. No heat involved in these that I've showed you. Although it's a fire, it's a cool fire. You saw the picture of the rust. This is stainless steel on the left. It's been subjected to John's energy beams. Rust. Stainless steel rusting, folks. Ongoing effects. That's one of the key things. John switches off his equipment and the metal carries on changing for a while. And these samples have been tested at the Max Planck Institute. Here's a film I made. Let's try and get this to go. I was in New York. I went to New York in January this year with Judy Wood. We were meant to come here, Judy. And it's, oh God, it's so lovely and warm too.
It's what?
Lovely and warm. We've been freezing our nuts up outside. We've got the best bloody shots from in here.
Very good, period.
I haven't got it, Judy. I've got a bloody close-up bloody...
This is going to be good.
It is bloody good now, I'm going to believe this.
I'm not sure you can call that stuff, considering I grew up in Buffalo.
Oh, I see. I'm on the front corner.
Oh man.
The picture I have from October, where it's only like one story down.
It's from fires, from collapse, from burning thermite, which is just an incendiary. No. Some type of nuclear effect. Bankers Trust, not many people know about this building. Directly opposite the World Trade Center. Now you think the steel section hanging down has been blasted across by some type of explosion and caused all that damage here, down this gash. But if you look at this piece, it's pretty much intact. It's got a bit of damage there. So what caused all this damage here? Why is this sort of gouged out here? We've got a close-up of this. Look at this here. This is inside World Trade Center, Bankers Trust. FEMA reported no fire in this building. There was no fire. But look at this beam here. It's got holes in it. How can that get crinkled like that? Can anyone say John Hutchison's molten metal effect, which he generates with up to a maximum of 4 kilowatts of power? Bankers Trust, soon after 9/11, 28th of July 2006, you can see it's pretty much repaired. They've sort of built across all these areas here. But then, why repair a building and then dismantling it? They're taking it down piece by piece now, after it's said to have had a mould infection. Mould infection on the steel frame building. Strange. Look at this. Central beam. Would anyone agree with me that there seems to be a large amount of rust compared to these other beams here? And this one. It's rusting. Brief sound clip here. Let's see if I can get this one going. This is when we went in January. When I went to New York, we also went on to Ambrose Lane's show.
One of the very interesting things that I filmed was a hosing down of a cable from a crane with a big fire hose, and it wasn't just like a squirt. It was quite a big gush of water over a few tens of seconds.
And the cable was dangling from a big crane. It wasn't laying on the ground. It was just straight dangling.
So what would be your comments on all of that, John?
Well, it seems that if that's what's going on there, it seems like there's some kind of infection of some type, or something unusual happening there. Because if Judy's walking around there and getting sore throats, there's some kind of reaction or chemical reaction going on there.
Right, and Bankers Trust, as we know, had that big gash in the front, which they repaired, and then they started taking the building apart. Why would they repair it and then take the building apart? And they're still working on taking the building apart while we were there. They probably have about half of it gone. It's about 20 stories left. But with the beams they replaced the damaged ones with, the missing, there's just a void that had been in the middle of the building. There's a tremendous amount of rust on those brand new beams that were used to replace the old ones with.
That's not good. That means there's a reaction in the steel or in the ground there that's causing that to happen. And when that starts to happen, especially where the contacts with the welding and main bolts are, that leads to structural failure.
We've recently heard that they're still not going to start any construction at ground zero at the moment. 9/11 and the Hutchison effect. We've done a study of this now. I've written 3 articles about all this that I'm putting up here now. We posted, Judy Wood posted the study early this year, about January, I forget the exact date. It might have even been, first day she posted it was, I think, Christmas Day last year, but we didn't really release it, or she didn't really release it until January. I think it's an ace in the hole because of the reaction we've had to this. Ace Baker may be a name familiar to some people in the audience. He'd done a study about sort of the plane fakery, quite a good study actually. And we were friends with this guy essentially, and we exchanged quite a few emails with him. But 6 hours after we went on that radio show, I think it was the second appearance, may have been the first one, I'd have to go and check. He said that he'd bought some Tesla coils, which is what John Hutchison uses in his experiments. And he said he was going to try and reproduce these Hutchison effect experiments that John had done as part of the study of the Hutchison effect. Later he admitted that Ace himself had made a fake video. What he did was he did some of these supposed levitation experiments, and what he did was he filmed them upside down with a magnet. So he had something where he got a sample held with a magnet, he filmed it from the front, released the magnet hidden from the camera, and the sample dropped down, but then he flipped the video upside down so it looked like the thing had levitated. And he pretended that he'd made a Hutchison effect video, and therefore he claimed this was what John Hutchison had done to make the video like the cam video, and there's others that we've got. And Baker said, in summary, there's a lot of information, Hutchison is a video faker, pure and simple. There is no Hutchison effect, I'm sorry. Hutchison makes silly upside down videos. But Baker had not produced the levitation of the cannonball, which we've seen, the metal effects that I've shown you. We've got 500 pounds of metal samples from John Hutchison, where we've got this strange melting without heat. The fire effects that you saw with the boat, he hasn't reproduced those. And the bending and flexing motions, he'd not managed to reproduce those either. So he claimed to have debunked John Hutchison and proved 100% that it was a fraud with only reproducing one effect with a video fakery.
So when did he finally admit that it was fake?
I'm sorry?
He admitted it was fake.
Initially he pretended that he'd made this genuine video and he sent it to us, and we didn't really comment because I certainly wasn't sure whether it was a fake or not. But it was about a week later, after he'd initially said he'd performed these experiments, that he'd admitted that it was a fake video. So in other words, he'd deliberately done fakery to debunk research which had been ongoing for 30 years. It's quite, I've got all the details in these articles, so there's a lot of information. Now, Jim Fetzer, who is the founder of the Scholars Group, he wrote to me. I'd known about Hutchison's work. In fact, I'll tell you this here. Fetzer wrote to me when I'd said, I think the Hutchison effect was involved on 9/11, some version of it, because the evidence is too strong. Fetzer said to me in an email, you have taken for granted that Hutchison's research is well-founded or at least sincere. And this was incorrect, because I had known of John Hutchison's work since 1998 or 1999. And having come across it in a book by Albert Budden, and also heard it discussed on a UK documentary called $1 Billion Secret, which again is on the internet. And on the 3rd of March 2008, Fetzer wrote to Dr. Judy Wood, Judy, between us, if Judy were to back off her relations with Hutchison, whom I consider to be a fraud, I think her standing can be salvaged. What right has he got to say that? Scholars for 9/11 Truth isn't an official group, it doesn't have any official affiliation, it's voluntary, but yet essentially Fetzer is threatening Judy Wood's standing in 9/11 research because she has said that the effects of 9/11 at the World Trade Center look similar to Hutchison effects, and they appeared on the radio together. Whether she is willing to do that, I have no idea, but it's certainly an option is available to her. So Fetzer doesn't want her to talk about Hutchison effect, basically. Why not? Now, we've posted this on forums. Now, if you try and post stuff about the lack of planes at the World Trade Center or Hutchison effect stuff, directed at energy research, this is typical of the response you often get, not universally, but almost universally, on any forum on the internet. This is a forum administrator called Jeff on rigorous intuition. I'm not budging on Wood and Reynolds. Call me a gatekeeper if you like, but it's my gate and I'm keeping it. And he closed the thread. Closed the thread when we tried to talk about these topics. Editor, a moderator on RINT forum, said of a post related to Judy Wood's Hurricane Erin study, which I'm coming to, move to bin. Judy Woods and the rest of these truthers are on a different planet. I've seen them abusing forum after forum. If I catch any of them on here, they will be banned immediately. Internet, the forum of free speech. Bugger the evidence, we're going to shut you down. Now I've been having some interesting website visitors, and so this is a collation of Dr. Judy Wood's and my own website. Look, who's been visiting? 33 visits from the Air Force, US Air Force. 18 visits from, this is in a short period of time, only in about 2 weeks. NASA 17 times. Somebody from NASA came onto my website and had a look at an article of mine, I think for 20 minutes to get news about life on Mars. Believe it or not, because I've got an article about that. Because I'm lying to you about Mars as well, as some of you probably know. Totally lying. We've had Los Alamos been on, I've had Kinetic, we're on this weekend again for 45 minutes looking at my website. That's the privatised arm of the UK Defence Research Agency. They were on my website 45 minutes this weekend, starting off with the Hutchison effect stuff. Lockheed Martin have been on, Raytheon, all kinds of people. All kinds of people have been on. Now the next thing is one of the big things. Judy Wood tried to find out a bit more about this material. Now if you look at these pictures here, she wanted to find out more about what the after effects were and what the material which came up from the ground. If you look at this smoke here. Now if this is fires, these things wouldn't work because these are operated by hydraulics. So if there's a lot of hot fire going on under this, these things would seal up and stop working. These guys wouldn't be there. They'd be just fried and cooked, or at least too hot to work at the very least. There was no molten metal at ground zero. There was no molten metal. It's another fake story, I'm afraid, folks. So Judy wanted to look at this plume of material, and she pointed out here, very astutely, you can just see here, in fact I think I've got a zooming up of this, I have. This dark smoke is going one direction, and look at this white coloured smoke, it's making a sort of turn, 90-degree turn. So she was very interested in this sort of information. I would miss this sort of thing looking at pictures, as you know, I'm not particularly good at looking at pictures, she is though. So the black fumes go west and the white fumes go south. Why is that? Well, we don't really know, but this is what brought us to this. So she's looking for more pictures. She's going to want to get more information about this smoke and what it's doing, what is it, where's it coming from, is it real smoke? That's what she found. This is a plume from the World Trade Center on 9/11. Look at this, folks. That's what she found. Anyone ever heard of Hurricane Erin on 9/11? How many? Let's show of hands. Who'd heard of, apart from the people already spoken about this with, how many people have heard of Hurricane Erin on 9/11?
I am totally amazed because I did disaster management and I, as one of my contacts, tracks hurricanes and everything else, and I have no inkling at all of a hurricane around land. None at all. So it's completely complex to me.
Here we go. 9/11 morning forecast. Well, we haven't got good information on this, but we have strong reason to believe that there was no mention of this hurricane on the standard US media weather forecasting. We've got rough seas shown there, and not shown on that one. It's about there. No hurricane shown on that 9/11 weather forecast. That's from space, 910. So geo-envis, that's from one of the satellites. I think it's probably a NOAA picture. That's from the 10th of September, day before, obviously. Now, this isn't Erin, but this is what you'd see from the International Space Station. They're only about 100 miles or so, I think it's 120 miles or something, I can't remember the figure, above the top of the hurricane. That's the sort of view you get of a hurricane from the International Space Station. But Frank Culbertson, who was on the ISS on 9/11, this is what he had to say.
Long a staple of space missions took on new poignancy in mid-September when Culbertson and his crewmates viewed the plumes of smoke rising from New York City shortly after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center.
And as we went over Maine, we could see New York City and the smoke from the fires. Our prayers and thoughts go out to all the people there and everywhere else. Here I'm looking up and down the East Coast to see if I can see anything else. And to the people in Washington.
And Frank, that's an accurate assessment.
And I hope that the people responsible are caught and brought to justice as soon as possible. But first, our prayers and condolences to all involved. And I just wanted the folks to know that their city still looks very beautiful from space. I know it's very difficult for everybody in America right now. And I know folks are struggling very hard to deal with this and recover from it. But the country still looks good, and for New Yorkers, your city still looks great from up here.
I'll just see if I can get this sound clip going. It's just very brief of what he said. What did he say? What was it he said? Here we go, just to check.
Looking up and down the East Coast to see if I can see anything else.
Frank, you're looking up and down the East Coast to see if you can see anything else. No mention of that pretty great hurricane. How strange. Here's the path of Erin. Started around the 1st as a tropical storm. Went past Bermuda. There were a few reports of it from the Bermuda press and that area. And then I think it was CNN or something. I haven't got all the reports here, but you can go and look for them yourself if you wish. So no, it's nothing to worry about. It's going out to sea after Bermuda. Yeah, it's going out to sea all right from Bermuda, but almost in a straight line, straight up to New York City, where it made a right-hand turn, folks. And it kind of slowed down when it got to near New York. It was the strongest winds on the 10th and the largest extent on the 11th. This is just an animation that Judy had put together. It slowly becomes more organised. You can see it's very ragged at first, and then so there you have it. And that's just a comparison, the 10th, 11th and 12th of September. And you can see how the eye is kind of, on the 9th is quite well defined, a bit less well defined on the 11th, and then sort of tightened up a bit. So it's actually spun out a bit on the 11th, and then it seems to have tightened up again. Quite unusual behaviour. Comparison of some storm effects to some Hutchison effects. Dissimilar materials merge. How did this sheet of plywood get through the tree after, I think this was after Hurricane Andrew, I think both of these were. How did this piece of wood go through the trunk of the palm tree? We think it's got something to do with materials changing their properties. Just as John's experiments have made this metal knife merge into the aluminium block. It's a stainless steel knife, I believe, and an aluminium block. And then we've got these straws going into pieces of wood. Very strange. And again, how did this car, this is after a hurricane. Look at this fence, it's a wooden fence. How did this car get on top of the wooden fence? And it's not very badly damaged. We've got a few sort of scratches, but no major dents. Looks as if it's just been slowly fallen to rest on the fence, but it hasn't broken. This car's upside down. These two look relatively unharmed. That back window's come out, I think, but very strange. Why is the fence still vertical here? Or more or less, I think it's a little bit bowed there, but these are some more pictures from 9/11, two of which you've seen before. This one you haven't. This car's upside down. This is upside down. Leaves are all still on the trees, folks. So it can't have been a blast of wind, because the leaves would have blown off the trees. Now then, John Hutchison uses Tesla coils for his experiments. He doesn't use them as much now, but he has in the past. Now, one of the things that Judy noticed, because she's not an expert in any of this, she just looks at patterns and looks at data. And we think basically what they used, well, we don't say this explicitly because we can't, we can't reproduce it experimentally, obviously. But if you look at what a hurricane or a storm cell looks like, it looks a bit like a Tesla coil, and it is indeed charged. You have a charge at the top and an opposite charge at the bottom on the ground. So we think this is what they used for the energy system. They used the hurricane as an energy system. That's the basic thrust of what we're suggesting. Now this is I think this is the killer. Hard data, folks. Judy found this magnetometer data. Now, magnetometer, not surprisingly, is an instrument that measures the Earth's magnetic field. And there are a whole bunch of these units up in Alaska. And you can actually download the data from them today. You can go get their website and put it into a graph, as Judy's done here. And when you do that for 9/11, you see some very interesting things in the data. Oh, look, I'm going to zoom into this now. Let's look at the time scale here. 8:46, World Trade Center 1 gets a hole. World Trade Center 2 gets a hole, 9:02. World Trade Center 2 goes poof, in other words, turns to dust, 9:59. 10:28, World Trade Center 1 goes poof, and World Trade Center 7 goes poof, 5:20. Now you can see this magnetic field here is more or less flatlined. There's a bit of noise here, a little bit, maybe a bit of sunspot activity or something. But look at 9/11. And let's go a bit closer. There's a bit of a close-up for you, folks. So look at that. That's when World Trade Center 1 gets its hold. That orange line there, that faint orange line, is 9 o'clock. Does that look to you like it's a bit before 9 o'clock? So a plane crash, right, causes a disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field 3,500 miles away. Are you happy with that idea? Okay, fine. So you can see the magnetic field is severely disturbed during the events of 9/11. Then it returns more or less to a normal level after 9/11. That's what the data says. It's not hearsay. It's not, it's not about, put options and this type of thing. That's from what? We got 4 different instruments there, and there's more data to add to this that Judy's collected as well. She hasn't posted all of it yet, but there's more stuff on this that she's been looking at. So, 9/11, folks, black technology is what I call it. Stuff they don't tell you about. Stuff that's been maybe partly developed in reverse engineered extraterrestrial stuff. Stuff that they took from Hutchison in the 80s and developed into a weapon. And they covered it up with all this junk. Most people criticise Judy Wood for they can't specify the exact type of GUs. Well, we've gone a bit further with that now. We say it's to do with the Hutchison effect. The weapon has certain characteristics because it leaves a fingerprint. The residual effects, Bankers Trust Building. So look at the things we've looked at. Cold fires, upside down cars, the Bankers Trust Building, residual effects, no construction on ground zero, magnetometer data. Thermite, pancake collapse, doesn't explain the evidence. None of it does. Only this does. This is the only thing that explains the evidence. And if you want to find the truth, you have to look for the evidence and go out and look for it.
A lot of people talk about conspiracies over a shadow government. I'm willing to testify before Congress that these black operations do exist. I nearly became part of it. But I saw the light, I think. Or was it? And I got out. And that's it. We have to disclose what we know. And I am willing to testify before Congress under oath, or before any other organization, that what I witnessed was true.
Over recent years, it's been impossible for me to ignore this kind of barrage of publicity we've been hearing about unidentified flying objects or UFOs. So I've decided to embark on a journey to see if I can get to the core of what may or may not be going on. Now, the only real clue I have, given that most of the reports of UFOs, or at least a lot of them, come from America, is this document here, which is the annually published list of defense spending put out by the Pentagon. Inside this document is every single conceivable item of military equipment that America is likely to buy for its armed forces. But if you add up all the line items inside this budget book and you subtract their total from the annual published total of $250 billion that the Pentagon reports to Congress, you find that there's a mismatch of about $30 billion. Now, this is what we call the black budget, or America's billion-dollar secret, which is reserved for deeply classified programs. Now, I'm wondering whether inside this classified pot of money there may be some relationship between, say, deeply classified aircraft, which is something I know about, and what people commonly report as unidentified flying objects. So over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to be crisscrossing America, talking to people,
black budget,
visiting facilities.
Said to be as much as $1 trillion a year. I'll just play a bit of, I'll probably cut this clip off because we're getting short of time, but play a bit of this.
Good morning, my name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a 6th grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Wernher von Braun, in the U.S. the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space. And I said, teachers don't stop until June. He said, no, you have to understand, this is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system. The first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies.
Same city, different building. See if this is just... Okay. We stand at the beginning of a new age. Our government has in its hands a method of disrupting the molecular basis of matter, and its first impulse was to weaponize it. Is it so hard to understand, like splitting atoms create destruction was so hard to understand in 1945? Of course, this new invention came when the United States ruled supreme. A weapons system of vast new power comes online, and we didn't have an enemy worthy of using it. So we naturally use it on ourselves. That's from a guy called Steve Warren. I'm just going to go quickly through some conclusions. 9/11, multi-purpose crime. Destroyed the aging World Trade Center buildings, big insurance payout, possibly. Asbestos problems solved, all that. Created the war on terror to keep people in fear, allowed support for illegal wars to be built and gotten, and more controversially, tested advanced black directed energy weapons technology, tested how easily people can be fooled. Now they know that directed energy works pretty well, this weapon, whatever it is, the gizmo as we sometimes call it. They can use it with impunity and up the ante on the next false flag operation, which may involve aliens. Larry King Live in the States in the last couple of years has done about 6 programs on UFOs and extraterrestrials. In the years prior to that, in about 10 years prior to that, he'd probably done 2 or 3. Right, so these are my conclusions for tonight. War on terror is fake. Gargantuan lies are being told by most, if not all, top-level officials. The attacks on Iraq and Afghanistan are completely and utterly illegal and have no discernible basis other than as part of a covert agenda. It has nothing to do with spreading democracy or fighting terrorism. It's more to do with blood sacrifice, it would appear. 9/11 and 7/7 were psyops to dupe the public into accepting aggression against a framed enemy. And I've got a Power of Nightmares here if anybody wants more information on that, DVD. Advanced free energy technology is real. I mentioned that this energy, which destroyed the World Trade Center, it appears to be no heat involved, or very little. Very small amount of heat. No fire, no nuclear effects, ongoing effects. We think it's energy which is liberated from the 0 point somehow, and this is what John Hutchison believes his experiments do. So the problem you see for the free energy community, that some of you have heard about this, is yes, the powers that be have got free energy. They've known about it for a long time. In fact, they know a lot about it because they weaponized it, and they used it on 9/11. That's what they did. Whoever controls the energy supply controls the destiny of the human race in our current organised cultures, of course, that is. And I cannot ignore the links between the energy cover-up and 9/11 through Steve Jones. I did actually have another video of him, which I didn't show tonight because it was too long. I've got it on YouTube, though. What could we do with the due technology if we could use it for peaceful purposes? That's just a thought. Standard story of climate change is completely bogus. If you consider the occurrence of Hurricane Erin being closest to New York City on 9/11 and you ignore things like chemtrails, which we found a link between chemtrails and John Hutchison stuff, we can say that weather modification is real and operational, and has been for quite a long time. And we particularly Judy's gathered some more data about the Hurricane Erin now, which really locks it down even more than I've shown you tonight. This means that many or all of the environmental movements are operating on a false premise, well-meaning though they are. Climate change problems could possibly completely mitigated by the careful and benign use of this technology. We don't know where it is, but I suspect some of it is in space, but I don't know that. Attempts at cover-up continue. I would strongly suggest that through people like Steve Jones and Jim Fetzer, who won't discuss any of this, Fetzer, who is a big 9/11 figure, hasn't even commented on the Erin study at all. We think it's a smoking gun of 9/11. It's something you cannot debunk. Cannot be debunked. Jim Fetzer has tried to cover this up. He threatened Judy Wood. He called me a child at the end of an exchange in which I was trying to ask him why he thought the Hutchison effect was invalid, when we had all this documentary evidence to say that it was valid. The danger for the powers that be is people are making connections between 9/11, energy, weather modification and other related issues. So, breaking the cover-up, who are you going to tell about this, folks? Another rhetorical question. Amnesty International? They won't comment on 9/11 at all. Liberty won't comment on 9/11. None of the politicians or political parties, as you know, have commented. Stop the War won't comment on it. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth won't talk about directed energy weapons. They won't talk about Erin. They're supposed to be a 9/11 Truth group. Steve Jones's group won't discuss this. They think that directed energy weapons have been debunked by Dr. Greg Jenkins and his study which says all the debris was in the basements. So what do? First thing, stop buying newspapers. Probably most people don't buy newspapers. Don't buy newspapers. If you can do so without creating conflict, don't renew your TV license. BBC tried to ask Judy Wood to be involved in this latest documentary. I sent the guy packing. I told Mike Rudin, unless he got news of the key TAM cases on Radio 2 news bulletins for 24 hours, he was not going to get an interview with Judy Wood. He said he couldn't do it. Instead, you hear stories at the end of the news, which they have got time for, such as a dog swimming the channel or something. Somebody's dog swam the channel, but we're not going to tell you that NIST contractors have been sued for fraud over 9/11. Doesn't matter about all this stuff. They didn't have to go into that. The BBC should report that NIST have been sued over 9/11. You can take DVDs and booklets. There's not much time left, but I've got DVDs at the back. Take them away with you. Get more information on this. If you're interested, get clued up. Who else is going to fix the problem, folks? I've been writing for 5 years now. I've been writing to the BBC. They just say it's not important enough to broadcast. So that's basically it, and thank you very much for listening.